Hey friends, how you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadiyeh, Daf 95 of Masechta Yevamos. 1 second. Is my chair squeaky? Can you hear that? Probably not. Alright, hopefully not. Well, friends, Daf Tzadiyeh is serious stuff. Daf Tzadiyeh is serious stuff. Think you can handle it? What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about that situation where Sarah gets lost, right? Reuven's married to Sarah. She goes on a trip. She gets lost. That whole thing. I guess we kind of talk about that for a while. And then we talk about the end of the Mishnah where Rav Yossi talks about if other people are puzzle, he's puzzle. Other people not puzzle, he's not puzzle. It gets pretty serious. So, friends, if you think you can handle it, let's get started. So we're going to start on Daf Tzadi Dalaram and Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara, "V'teyasu b'shchiva da'achosa midi da'hava isha shaholach b'ayil dinas hayom." Friends, you got that? So the Gemara asks, well, we had said in our Mishnah that if you have Reuven's married to Sarah, now Sarah goes on some trip someplace, and a witness comes and says that Sarah is gestorben. So Reuven says, alright, well here's my chance, and he goes and he marries Sarah's sister Rivka. Sarah comes back home. Dang it. So now Sarah can stay married to Reuven, and obviously Rivka does not, because Reuven was still married to Sarah. So now, so we say over here that Sarah can go back to Reuven, right? Sarah and Reuven can remain together. The Gemara asks, but 1 second. That's in stark contrast to the original case that we entertained in this parak, which is that Reuven's the one who gets lost, and if Sarah then goes and marries some other fellow, so then we say that she's not allowed to remain with Reuven. So, Frekti Gemara, right, let's read that again. Let's say that Sarah should be aser to Reuven when Reuven and Rivka sleep together, just like when Reuven gets lost and Sarah goes sleep with somebody else, so then Sarah is not allowed to go back to Reuven. So here also she should be unable to go back to Reuven. And for the Gemara, lo dami, apples and oranges. Ishto de b'mezid asira mida oraisa b'shoge gazu barabana. Well, in the case of Eishes Ish, if she would intentionally have an extramarital relationship, she would, mida oraisa, she'd be unable to remain with Reuven. So then, even when it's bishogeg, even when there's a mistake, so then still we make a gezerah and we say that they cannot remain together, as opposed to achos isha dibemezid lo asira mida oraisa, as opposed to if Reuven and Rivka, the sister, have a relationship with each other intentionally. So while it's arayos and it's a chiyuv kares, nonetheless, Sarah and Reuven would be able to remain together. So b'shogeg l'gozu barabonon. So when there is a mix-up that, they assume that Sarah was dead and then Reuven married Rivka. So in that case, lo gozu barabonon, the rabbis do not make a gezerah, and Sarah and Reuven could remain together. How do we know that if Reuven and Rivka have a relationship, so then Reuven and Sarah could remain together? The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Osa, that the pasuk says by a sota, which is of course Eishes Ish, it says Osa, V'shachav Ish Osa Shichvazer, right? In the context of sota, Eishes Ish, she's unable to go back to her husband. So we're saying specifically Osa, specifically by Eishes Ish, Osa Shchivasa Osarta, specifically by Eishes Ish, if she has a relationship, an extramarital relationship, she's unable to go back to her husband. But if Reuven and Rivka have a relationship, Sarah could remain together with Reuven, because otherwise I would have thought to make the following logical argument. Friends, this is going to be a big discussion a little bit later on in our daf, what exactly this means. But Rashi sort of jumps to the conclusion over here jumps to the maskana, which is that it's talking about Eishes Ish. So let's read this again. So, Valodino, I would have thought logically to make the argument, Uma b'makom shebal iser kal, in a situation where there was a more lenient relationship, ne'esar ha'oser, the oser becomes aser. Holy shnikes, how do you even get started with this? But basically we're comparing, again, we're making the assumption that this iser, that this baal iser kal is referring to Eishes Ish. So when it comes to Eishes Ish, so it's a more lenient situation than Achos Isha. Why is Eishes Ish more lenient than Achos Isha? The reason is because Eishes Ish, there's a remedy, right? If Sarah wants to marry some other fellow, so Reuven gives her a get, and she can marry some other fellow, right? It's not right. There's a way to accommodate the situation so that she can get married to this other fellow. Masha Ein Kain, which is not the case by Achos Isha. Once Reuven marries Sarah, he can never marry Rivka as long as Sarah is alive. Or as long as Sarah is alive, there's nothing that anybody can do that will allow Reuven to be able to marry Rivka. So therefore it makes Achos Isha a more stringent case than Eishes Ish. And therefore, when it comes to Eishes Ish, who's the Oser? Who's the one that is sort of like holding things up over here? The husband. That the husband, it's on account of the husband that Sarah is not allowed to marry anybody else. But, he can give the get and then she can, right? So it's the husband who's holding things up. Whereas when it comes to Achos Isha, who's holding things up? Sarah, the wife, right? The reason why Reuven can't marry Rivka is because he's married to Sarah, right? If Sarah dies, then they can get married. But, the fact that Reuven's married to Sarah, so Sarah is kind of holding things up over here. So, tying it all together. So in the more lenient case being Eishes Ish, Ne'esar ha'oser, if Sarah has a extramarital relationship, right, Eishes Ish, so then Reuven, who was the Oser, the one who's sort of blocking Sarah from being able to have this relationship with this other person, Ne'esar, he becomes Asur, i.e. Sarah and Reuven are no longer allowed to be together. Then Kal V'chomer, in the more stringent case, Achos Isha, if Reuven has a relationship with Rivka, then certainly Ne'esar ha'oser. Who's the Oser? Sarah. Sarah is the one who's sort of blocking this relationship because Reuven's married to Sarah. So certainly she should then become Asur and be unable to remain with Reuven. So therefore, logically speaking, I would make the argument that if by Eishes Ish, Reuven and Sarah cannot remain together, so then certainly by Achos Isha, which is more stringent, Reuven and Sarah should be unable to remain together. But nonetheless, the pasuk says, Osa, that specifically by Eishes Ish, Reuven and Sarah would be unable to remain together, but by Achos Isha, they would be able to remain together. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, no nechluku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, okay, Beis Shammai Beis Hillel agree, B'Baal Chamoso Sheposel Es Ishto. So says Rabbi Yehuda that Beis Shammai Beis Hillel agree that if a fellow, Reuven, if he sleeps with his mother-in-law, he's no longer allowed to remain with his wife Sarah. Okay? Alma nechleku. Where is there a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? B'Baal Achos Ishto. By Achos Isha, if Reuven sleeps with Rivka. Shebeis Shammai omim posel. That Beis Shammai says that Reuven and Sarah cannot remain together. Based on the logic that we just explored a minute ago, right? That if by the Baal Isser Kal Ne'esar Oser, then certainly the Baal Isser Chomer Ne'esar Oser, right? That Beis Shammai does not hold of Osa, of that limud that excludes Achos Isha from being Oser. I.e., means that Achos Isha, they can remain together. So Beis Shammai Omrim Posel. So Beis Shammai says that if Reuven sleeps with Rivka, so then Sarah cannot remain with Reuven because of that Kal V'chomer. Beis Hillel Omrim Lo Posel. Whereas Beis Hillel says no, if Reuven sleeps with Rivka, he could remain with Sarah because Osa, because the pasuk says only by Eishes Ish are they not allowed to remain together, but by Achos Isha they can remain together. Amar Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, Lo nechleku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel b'Baal Achos Ishto shelo posel es Ishto. Says Rabbi Yossi that actually Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree by Achos Isha that if Reuven sleeps with Rivka, he could remain with Sarah because of Osa. Amanechelku, where do Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue Bibal Chamoso when Reuven sleeps with his mother-in-law? Beis Shammai omen posel, Beis Hillel omen lo posel. That Beis Shammai says that if Reuven sleeps with his mother-in-law, then he's possible to his wife, and Beis Hillel says that if Reuven sleeps with his mother-in-law, then he is permitted to remain with his wife. Now, Rabbi Yossi had said that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that by Achos Isha, Reuven can remain with Sarah. So how come? Nefi, because Shabbatchila hu mutar b'chol anoshim sheba'olam. Because initially, Reuven was allowed to marry any woman that he wanted. V'hi mutaris b'chol ha'anoshim sheba'olam, and Sarah can marry any man that she wants. Kodsha, but now when they get married, hu osra v'hi osarto. He makes her osir. Okay, we're going to explain what this is, and she makes him osir. Miruba isur she'osra mi isur she'osarteu. Now, the level of sort of restrictions that apply to Sarah after marriage are more significant than the levels of restrictions that apply to Reuven after marriage. Shu asur b'chol anoshim sheba'olam, in that when Reuven marries Sarah, she is now unable to marry any other man in the world, as long as she's married to Reuven. V'hi lo asarteu ela b'krov voseho. Whereas when Reuven and Sarah get married, Reuven could still, marry other women, but he would not be able to marry her relatives, such as her mother, daughter, things like that. Sister. V'alodinu. And now we say, logically speaking, umahu she'asra b'chol anoshim sheba'olam. When Sarah gets married to Reuven, she is now asr to all of the men in the world. She can't marry any of the men in the world. Shagaga ba'asrla. And if she makes a mistake by somebody who's asr to her, i.e., if it was like rape or, there was some kind of relationship that she didn't intentionally go into that relationship, it was against her will, so she remains permitted to Reuven, right? As long as Reuven's not a Kohen, so if Sarah has a relationship with with another fellow or gets raped or something, right, that wasn't consensual, so then she's permitted to remain together. Shagag ba'asur lo enudin shelo ne'asar lo b'mutar lo. Right? So then if Reuven makes a mistake with somebody who he's not allowed to be with, for example, Sarah's sister Rivka, certainly they would be able to remain together. So we just proved, right? So Rabbi Yossi had said that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if Reuven has a relationship with Rivka, he could remain together with Sarah. That is because, if Sarah is with another man, not consensually, so then she could remain with Reuven, right? So if there was shogeg in the context of Eshes Ish, she could remain with Reuven. So then with Reuven and Rivka, if there was shogeg, then he could remain with Sarah. Now, okay, so that's talking about accident. That's talking about shogeg. Mezid minayin. How do we know that even if Reuven sleeps with Rivka intentionally, he could remain with Sarah? Tamalomer Osa. The pasuk says Osa by Eshes Ish by Sota. Osa shchivasa osarta ben shchivas achosa osarta. That specifically by Sota, she would be also to her husband. But if Reuven sleeps with Rivka, Sarah's sister, they would be able to remain together. So Sarah and Rivka and Reuven would be able to remain together, even if Reuven and Rivka had a relationship intentionally. Amr b'ami, Amr Shlakish. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. How come Rabbi Yehuda says that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if Reuven were to sleep with his mother-in-law, then he'd be asur to his wife? Because the pasuk says, "Ba'ish yisifu osu ve'esen," that if a fellow sleeps with his mother-in-law, then he's got to get burnt. His mother-in-law's got to get burnt to death. His wife has to get burnt to death. That doesn't make sense. Why should he have to burn his wife to death? She didn't do anything. So if, clearly we're not saying that you have to burn, kill his wife with streifa. She didn't do anything wrong. So then what's the pasuk talking about when it says you have to burn them, seemingly including his wife? It means at least they will be unable to remain together until justice is acted upon, is executed, I guess. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, says Rav Yehuda and then Rav Shmuel, Ein halacha Rav Yehuda, that the halacha is not like Rav Yehuda. I.e., right, so Rav Yehuda had said that if a fellow sleeps with his mother-in-law, everyone agrees that he would be usher to his wife, but we don't agree, we don't hold like Rav Yehuda. There was a certain fellow who pashut out a relationship with he slept with his mother-in-law. Asir Rav Yehuda nagde. So Rav Yehuda, not Rebbe Yehuda, Rav Yehuda gave him malchus, beat him up a shtickle. Omerle, and Rav Yehuda said to this fellow, Ilabda Omer Shmuel, and halacha Rav Yehuda, if not for the fact that Shmuel said that the halacha is not like Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda says that everyone agrees that you'd be forbidden from remaining with your wife. Asrisa alach isur the alam. If not for the fact that Shmuel says that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, I would have said that you are never permitted to go back to your wife ever again on account of having slept with your mother-in-law. But Shmuel says that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, so you would be permitted to stay with your wife. Okay, so now as promised, the Gemara is going to get into a discussion about what exactly is this what does it say? Ba'al Isser Kal Ne'esara User. That in a situation where there's a relationship between a more lenient prohibition, the User becomes Asur. So I said that I was talking about Eishes Ish. It was more lenient than Achus Isha because there's a way out with a get. But the Gemara is going to sort of try to figure out if it, is Eishes Ish, and it's going to end up saying that it's Eishes Ish, but we're going to entertain a number of other options. My Isser Kal, what exactly is this lenient prohibition, that if there is a relationship in a lenient prohibition, Esara Oser, the forbidder becomes forbidden. Amar v'chizda marzah grushasu mishanises. Okie dokie. Who could tell me what this is? So it says of Chizda, there's a situation of marzah grushasu mishanises. You ready? Reuven is married to Sarah. Reuven and Sarah get divorced. Sarah then marries Shimon. Shimon is the Oser, the prohibitor. Why is Shimon the prohibitor? Because when Sarah marries Shimon, she's no longer allowed to go back to Reuven. She's no longer allowed to go back to Reuven, right? Meaning, if Reuven and Sarah get divorced, they can get remarried. But if Sarah marries Shimon, Reuven and Sarah can no longer get remarried. So, the Oser, the prohibitor, is Shimon, because by Shimon marrying Sarah, Sarah is now, by Shimon marrying Sarah, Reuven and Sarah are prohibited from getting back together. But what happens if Reuven and Sarah do get back together? So that's the Baal Isser Kal, right? Reuven and Sarah do get back together, which is a prohibition, it's a lav. So Baal Isser Kal, and then what? Ne'esar ha'oser. Who did we say the prohibitor is? Shimon. But now Shimon becomes Osir, because when Shimon and Sarah get divorced, they could theoretically get remarried, but if somebody else, whether that's Levi, whether that's Reuven, but if somebody else now marries Sarah, Shimon can no longer marry Sarah. So now, right, so Baal Isser Kal means that if Reuven remarries Sarah after she was married to Shimon, which he's not allowed to do, but he's Baal Isser Kal, he does this thing, it's a prohibition. Ne'esar ha'oser, Shimon, who initially made Reuven Osir to marry Sarah, Shimon now becomes prohibited. The prohibitor now becomes prohibited because since Sarah married Reuven, Shimon is no longer allowed to remarry Sarah. So my Isser Kal, what's this lenient Isser? Amar of Chizde Marzah Grushasu Mishanises. It's talking about if Reuven remarries Sarah once she's already been married to Shimon. Ba'alel Hai, that when Shimon sleeps with Sarah, Asra alei dehai. She's no longer allowed to go back to Reuven. But if nonetheless Reuven is Baal Isser Kal, he does this prohibition by remarrying Sarah anyways, Asra alei dehai, well now Shimon, who is the initial prohibitor, becomes prohibited himself. Skip the next two words. But right, Isur Isser Olam. But the Gemara says, wait, but you can't say that Machzor Grushaso is this Isser Kal and it's more lenient than Achos Isha, because by Machzor Grushaso it's a stringent situation because Sarah is Nitma Aguf. Right? When it comes to Achos Isha, Sarah didn't have any part in this. It was between Reuven and Rivka. Whereas by Machzor Grushaso, Sarah is a key player over here, and it's her body, right, who's being involved in this, right, in sleeping with Reuven, and sleeping with Shimon, going back to Reuven. Therefore, that makes it more stringent. V'isur isur olam. Additionally, this is a prohibition that will be forever, as opposed to Achos Isha. If Sarah dies, Reuven and Rivka could be together. So therefore, I can understand why Machzor Grushaso Mishani says Ne'esara Oser. It's a more stringent case. Selam Rish Lakish, rather says Rish Lakish Yevamos. We're talking about a situation of a Yevamos, that if you have Reuven is married to Sarah, Reuven dies, they don't have any, he doesn't have any kids, so then we're talking about Sarah. Okay, Yevamos Laman, and who's Sarah having a relationship with? Like what's the case? If we're saying that it's talking about she has a relationship with some other person, right? Meaning Reuven died, he didn't have any children. Sarah now needs to do Yibum with Shimon, which means that she's not allowed to have a relationship with anybody else, right? It says, Losia Eishes Hamesh Hames Achutza Li'Zar. She can't have a relationship with anybody else. She has to do either Yibum or Chalitza. So that's a lav, right? It's Baal Isser Kal, right? If she has a relationship with somebody else, she's having it's a prohibition, it's a lav. And Ne'esara Oser, right? It's like Rav Hamnuna, the Amar of Hamnuna, that Rav Hamnuna says, Shomer Yevamos Shezinsa, that if Sarah were to have a relationship with some other person, not Shimon, Asur Yevamos, she's now no longer allowed to be with Shimon. So here we have that she was Baal Isser Kal, right? She was over on a lav, she had a relationship with some other person, even though she had to do even with Shimon. Now, the Oser, who's the Oser? Who's the prohibitor? Shimon. That it's because Shimon is the Yavam and they need to do Yibum or Chalitza, it's Shimon who's prohibiting Sarah from being able to marry anybody else. So, now when Sarah has a relationship with some other guy, Ne'esara Oser, the prohibitor, Shimon himself becomes Asur, like Rav Hamnuna, who says that if Sarah has a relationship with somebody else, she's now Asur to Shimon. But Mali Yevamos, Shkenit Ma'aguf, Bisur Birov. But one second, Yevamos is a stringent case because, it involves her body, right? She's sleeping with somebody else, she's having a relationship with somebody else. And also, it's Asur Birov, right? She's basically forbidden to anybody other than Shimon, as opposed to Achos Isha, which is really only just, the sister that's not allowed. So, Ela Yevamos La'achin. So rather, it's talking about the brothers. Right? That if you have Reuven was married to Sarah, Reuven died, he didn't have any children. Now there's Shimon and Levi. Ovad ba Maimer Hai. Now if Shimon does Maimer with Sarah, it gives her Kesef Kiddushin. Asr Alei Dahai. Well, now Levi can no longer do Yibum with Sarah. But now, if Levi then was Ba Al Isser Kal, he then sleeps with Sarah, which is only also Midir Abanon, right? Because when Shimon does, I don't know what you said, but Levi sleeps with, right, Sarah, right? So when Shimon did Maimer with Sarah, so then Midir Abanon, there's a connection now between Shimon and Sarah, and Levi cannot do Yibum with Sarah anymore. Midir Abanon. Now, if Levi nonetheless does sleep with Sarah, so then that's Baal Isser Kal, he violated Isser D'Rabbanan, and Ne'esara Oser, Shimon, who by doing Maimer made Sarah Osir to Levi, Shimon now himself becomes Osir from doing Yibum with Sarah, since Levi slept with Sarah. So Avad Ba Maimer, I backed up a few words. Avad Ba Maimer Hai, if Shimon does mimer with Sarah, also alei dehai. So now Levi is no longer allowed to do yibum with Sarah. But if Levi nonetheless sleeps with Sarah, also alei dehai. So now Sarah becomes asura to Shimon. My area shaba aleh sheni afilu avod ba nami mimer. But then the Gemara says, yeah, but why does this specifically have to be a situation of ba al iser kal? We can have the same situation where if Levi simply did mimer, right? So if Shimon does mimer with Sarah, so then she becomes asur to Levi. Now, if Levi then does mimer with Sarah also, so then she becomes asur to Shimon. So why does it have to dafka be through bia? So, halo kasha, it's not a question. It's like Rabban Gamliel to Amr ein maimer achar maimer. Rabban Gamliel says, yeah, but there's no concept of maimer achar maimer, right? Levi's mimer would be irrelevant if Shimon already did mimer. Yeah, but afilu nosan la get, afilu chalatzla. Yeah, but still, you can accomplish the same thing by if Levi gives her a get, or if he does chalitza with Sarah, so then she will be asur to Shimon, right? So it doesn't have to be specifically ba al isser kal. It doesn't have to be that he dafka slept with her. So Ella Amr Rabbi Yochanan, rather says Rabbi Yochanan Sota. Okay, situation of Sota, right? That Reuven's married to Sarah, and he says, look, I don't want you being alone with this other fellow. Then two witnesses come and say, we saw that she was alone with this other fellow. So Sota Laman, who is this Sota having a relationship, right, with? So Ilema Liva'al, if we are saying to the husband, right, because we know that a Sota, once witnesses say that she was secluded with this other fellow, so then she's ushered to her husband until they go to the Beis Hamikdash and she drinks this water and we figure out what's going on. So Ba'alea Baal also Alea de Boel, and we're saying that now if she sleeps with the husband, she becomes ushered to the Boel, she becomes ushered to this fellow who she is suspected of sleeping with. My area Baale afilu nosan laget afilu Omer ein ani mashke. But then we say, who cares that Reuven and Sarah slept with each other after she was secluded with this other guy? It's not the fact that Reuven and Sarah slept with each other that makes her asur to this other guy. Regardless, once she was secluded with this other guy, she's asur the Baal, v'asur the Baal. She's asur both to her husband as well as to this other guy. So it has nothing to do with the fact that she slept with Reuven. Elasota levoel, rather we're saying that if she sleeps with this other guy, this Boel, but hay Isser Kalu, Isser Chamu, Danu Eshesish, but that wouldn't be an Isser Kal. That wouldn't be a situation where she had a relationship with a light case. That's a pretty serious case. It's Eshesish. Right? If she's sleeping with this other guy. Se'ela Amar Rave Eshesish. Rather, says Rave, as we said much earlier in the daf, that what is the Baal Isser Kal? It's talking about Eshes Ish, right? And we had said that Eshes Ish is considered a more lenient case than Achos Isha, because Eshes Ish, the Reuven can always just give Sarah a get, and then she can marry whoever she wants. But as opposed to Achos Isha, where there's really no way out of it, short of Sarah dying. So Ela Amar Rav, rather says Rav Eshes Ish, V'chein ki also Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan Eshes Ish. Also when Ravin came, he said the name of Rabbi Yochanan Eshes Ish. Umay karila Isser Kal. Why do we call Eshes Ish a light Isser? She'ein ha'osra osra koyama, because the one who is oser her, i.e. her current husband, Reuven, doesn't make her osra forever. He can always give her a divorce, and then she's permitted to marry whoever she wants. Tanan Amiyachi, we talk also in a verse like this. Abu Chanan Omer says, Abu Chanan Mishum Belazar, Eshes Ish, that it's talking about that this Isser Kal is an Eshes Ish. Ma'b'makom abal Isser Kal, she'en osra osra koyama, that certainly if in a case where Sarah has an extramarital relationship, which is more lenient in that the osra, that Reuven, who makes her osra to anybody else, doesn't make her osra forever. He can always give her a get. Sarah oser, and in that case, when Sarah has an extramarital relationship, still Reuven becomes osra to Sarah. Habal iser chomer sha'osra osra kol yamav, that if Reuven sleeps with Rivka, which is more stringent in that he can never marry Rivka as long as Sarah is alive. Enudin Shinesara Osra. Certainly, then I would think that Sarah would then be forbidden to Ruvain. Tamlomer Osa. Therefore, the pasuk says by Eishes Ish Osa Shchivasa Osarta Ven Shchivasa Chosa Osarta. That specifically by Eishes Ish, she becomes asura to her husband, but by Achos Isha, Sarah would not be asura to Reuven. Okay, so now we get to a bit of a complicated matzav, a complicated situation over here. If we go back to the Mishnah and Daf Tzadidal Amud Beis, so we saw, right, Rabbi Yossi, Omer says Rabbi Yossi at the end of the Mishnah, Kol she'polsa idei acher and polsa idei atzmo, that if somebody makes other, that if, Reuven makes other people asur, then he makes himself asur. If he doesn't make other people asur, then he doesn't make himself asur. So we have to understand what exactly this means. Now, so says the Gemara, alright, so Rabbi Yossi Omer Kol she'polsa v'chulei. So my Rabbi Yossi, what exactly is Rabbi Yossi saying? Ilaim, if you say that what he's saying is the Ka'omer Tanakama, that the Tanakama says the Azal Ishto v'Giso l'Mdina Sayom, that as we mentioned yesterday, in a situation where you have Reuven's married to Sarah, Sarah's sister Rivka is married to some guy named Shimon. Now, Sarah and Shimon go on a trip someplace. A witness comes and says that Sarah and Shimon are dead. So that leaves Reuven and Rivka. So Elam, if you're saying the Tanakama says the Azul Ishto v'Gisul Mdina Sayom, that when Sarah and Shimon go traveling someplace, and one witness comes back and says that Sarah and Shimon are gestorben, Eishes Giso Asira v'Ishto Sharia, that if a witness, right, so a witness comes and says that Sarah and Shimon are gestorben, and then they come back, and it's like, in the meantime, Reuven had married Rivka. So we say that, so the Tanakama says, well, Rivka is going to be forbidden from getting back with Reuven, with Shimon, but Sarah is going to be permitted to go back. Rivka is going to be forbidden to go back to Shimon. Sarah is going to be permitted to go back to Reuven. V'ka'amale Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says to the Tanakama, no. Ki'echidi ishto sharia, that just like Sarah is permitted to go back to Reuven, Eishes Giso Nami Sharia, also Rivka is going to be able to go back to Shimon. But Yihachi, Kol she'ein posa ayidei acherim, ein posa ayidei atzmo, kol she'ein posa ayidei atzmo, ein posa ayidei acherim yibai yalei. So says the Gemara, 1 second. If you look at the Mishnah, what does it say? It says, Kol she'posel, well, really, in this case, Kol she'ein posa ayidei acherim, eino posa ayidei atzmo. That if he doesn't make somebody else asur, he doesn't make himself asur. But this is the opposite. It's that since he doesn't make himself asur, he doesn't make somebody else. He doesn't make, Sarah, Rivka, and Shimon asur. So therefore it's backwards, right? So if that's the case, kol she'ein posa ayidei acherim and posa ayidei atzmo, kol she'ein posa ayidei atzmo and posa ayidei acherim ba'yilei. It shouldn't be that, if somebody else isn't possible, then he's not possible. It's that since he's not possible, therefore somebody else is not possible. So ve'ela ke'echi de'eishes giso asira ishtonami asira. So rather, let's say that no. So what it means is the opposite. That since Rivka is also to Shimon, so then also Sarah is going to be also to Reuven, according to Rabbi Yossi. But Atenach kol she'posel, kol she'eno posel ma'avid. Okay, fine. So we just explained kol she'posel ayidei acherim, posel ayidei atzmo. That since Rivka is posel to Shimon, so then Sarah is posel to Reuven. But what's the situation of kol she'eno posel ayidei acherim, eno posel ayidei atzmo? So Omer Reb Ami says, Reb Ami a reisha, that it's referring to the reisha, the first part of our Mishnah at the beginning of the parak. And he says, Al pi bezdin teitze uftur min hakorban, that if right in the situation where Reuven and Sarah are married, Reuven goes on some trip, a witness comes and says that Reuven's gestorben. So if Sarah got remarried to some other guy based on this one witness, and Bezdin said she can get remarried. So then when Reuven comes back, she cannot remain with this other guy, uftuam in a korban, but she does not have to bring a korban. Alpi edim, but if she got married because there were two witnesses who said that Reuven was gestorben, say she cannot remain with this new guy, but v'chayev is b'korban. But she has to bring a korban. And the sort of the strength of Bezdin is that on their account, Sarah is potter from having to bring a korban. V'ka'amar Tanakama, and the Tanakama is saying Loshna al pi edim de eshes giso sharia, that if there were witnesses, if there were two witnesses that came and said that Sarah and Shimon are dead, so then Sarah would be Rivka would be permitted to go back to Shimon. Veloshna al pi bezdin de eshes giso asira, and if there was only one witness that came back and said that Sarah and Shimon were dead, and then they were really alive, so then Rivka would be forbidden to go back to Shimon. But either way, when it comes to the situation, but when it comes to Sarah would be permitted to Reuven, right? So again, so we're saying if there were two witnesses that were testifying that Sarah and Shimon died, so if there were two witnesses, so then Rivka would be able to go back to Shimon. But if there was only one witness, Rivka would be unable to go back to Shimon. But either way, Sarah would be able to go back to Reuven. V'ka'amar le Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi is saying, Al pi bezdin de polsa de acherim, that if there was only one witness, and therefore Rivka is unable to go back to Shimon, so then polsa de atzmo, well then Sarah is not going to be able to go back to Reuven. Al pi edim, but if there were two witnesses, de enu polsa de acherim, that in that case, Rivka would be able to go back to Shimon, so then eno posai de atzmo, well then Sarah would be able to go back to Reuven. So basically, in a situation where there was only one witness, the Tanakama says that Rivka would be unable to go back to Shimon, but Sarah would be able to go back to Reuven. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says no. If Rivka cannot go back to Shimon, so then Sarah cannot go back to Reuven. But if there are two witnesses and Rivka can go back to Shimon, so then Sarah would be able to go back to Reuven in that case. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Omar says, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha lo Sefer. No, it has nothing to do with the first part of the Mishnah. It's entirely on the later part of the Mishnah, right, where Reuven and Sarah are married. Sarah goes on some trip, and then a witness comes and says that Sarah is dead, so Reuven marries Rivka. So the azli arusoso vigiso, or the azli ishto vigiso. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says it depends what Reuven's relationship was with Sarah. Depends if he was married or if he was only engaged. Right? So the azli arusoso vigiso, or the azli ishto vigiso. That in one case, right, in the case where it says that Sarah, that Rivka would be usher to go back to Shimon, and Sarah would be usher to go back to Reuven. So that is where Reuven and Sarah were only engaged, because what will happen is the yentis. What will happen is that if Reuven and Sarah were only engaged, and then Sarah and Shimon go out on this trip, and then the witness comes and says that Sarah and Shimon died. If Reuven then goes and marries Rivka, the Yentis are going to say that, well, Reuven was only engaged, was only betrothed to Sarah, and there was some kind of stipulation in their marriage that says that if some condition isn't met, so then they're not actually going to be betrothed at all. And that is why Reuven then went and married Rivka. And therefore, it's mamish a proper marriage. And if it's a proper marriage, so then Rivka is also to Shimon, and Sarah is going to be also to Reuven. But if Reuven and Sarah were mamish married, well, then clearly it was a mistake, right? Reuven clearly made a mistake by marrying Rivka, and therefore, right, the Yenters are going to say, oh yeah, it must have been a mistake, and therefore Rivka can go back to Shimon and Sarah can go back to Reuven. So again, the Azle Arusaso V'giso, the Azle Ishto V'giso V'kamer Tanakama. The Tanakama is saying Loshna Ishto V'giso V'loshna Arusaso V'giso. The Tanakama says, look, it doesn't make a difference if it is if Reuven was married to Sarah or if he was betrothed to Sarah. Eishes giso asira v'ishto sharia. Rivka is going to be also to Shimon, and Sarah is going to be permitted to Reuven. V'kamer le Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says, wait, it depends. Ishto v'giso, if Reuven was married to Sarah, that you can't say that there was some kind of stipulation that they had in their marriage. And in that case, the assumption is that when Reuven married Sarah, it was a mistake, and therefore when Reuven married Rivka, it was a mistake, and therefore when Sarah and Shimon come back, so then Sarah will be able to go back to Reuven, and Shimon will be able to go back to Rivka. Right? So since Rivka can go back to Shimon, so then Sarah can go back to Reuven. But if Reuven was only engaged to Sarah, you could say that the Yentas are going to say that Reuven and Sarah had some kind of stipulation in their betrothal, and that stipulation was not met, which is why Reuven married Rivka, which would, the Yentas would assume that it's a proper marriage. So in that case, right, Rivka would be unable to go back to Shimon, so then also Reuven, right, Sarah would be unable to go back to Reuven. Now Rav Yehuda says the name of Shmuel, that the halacha is like Reb Yossi. That, if it's posai de acherim, then it's posai de atzmo oichet. So, and if it's not posai de acherim, then it's not posai de atzmo. And we're assuming right now, like Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, that we're talking about that when it's posai de atzmo, posai de acherim, posai de atzmo, that is arusaso v'giso. And when it says eno posai de acherim, eno posai de atzmo, that's talking about ishto v'giso. Okay. So Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel Alachi Rabbi Yossi Maskef Lo Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asks the kasha. Umi Amar Shmuel Alachi. Would Shmuel really say that the halacha is like Rav Yossi? Ve'itmar, but it was stated Yevamo. That when it comes to a Yevamo, okay, what about a Yevamo? Rav Omar Harei Ke'eshes Ish, Shmuel Amar Eina Ke'eshes Ish. So Rav says that she's not. Rav says that she is like an Eshes Ish. And Shmuel says she's not like an Eshes Ish. And the question is, what exactly does this mean? So V'amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, Kigon, for example, Shekidesh Achiv Es Ha'isha, that if you have Reuven is Mekadesh, he's betrothed Sarah, V'halach Lo L'Medina Sayam, then Reuven goes on a trip somewhere, V'shama Shemes Achiv, and then Shimon, Reuven's brother Shimon, finds out that Reuven died, V'amad V'nasa Es Ishta, and then Shimon then went and married Sarah. The Rav Amarei Ke'eshes Ish Basur Liyavam. So Rav says that she's like an Eshes Ish, that she's also to Shimon. Why? Well, it sounds like Rav is saying that, well, since Reuven was betrothed to Sarah, the Yentis are going to say that they had some kind of a stipulation in they are I'm sorry. Wait, so in the event that the roles got a little bit switched around over here, right? So one second. So let's say this again. So what's the case? Okay, the case is a situation where Reuven was married to Sarah, right? And then Reuven goes on a trip somewhere. Shimon hears that Reuven's brother Shimon hears that Reuven is dead. Shimon then marries Sarah. Okay, now Reuven comes back, and we're saying that Reuven is right. That Sarah is also to Reuven because she's an Eshes Ish, and we refer to Reuven now as the Yavam because he's really a potential Yavam if Shimon were to die. So let's read it again inside. Sorry, I got a little bit. It's a little bit confusing, but V'amar Huna says Huna Kigon Shekidesh. Right, so Reuven betroths Sarah, and then Reuven goes on some trip, and then Shimon hears that Reuven is gestorben, so then he marries Sarah. The Rav Omar Harei Ke'eshes Ish, v'asur liyavam, Rav says that Sarah is like an Eish Ish of Shimon, and is also to the Yavam. Who's the Yavam? Ruvain, the original husband, the potential Yavam, that if Shimon were to die, so then Ruvain would be her Yavam. Basically what it's saying is that Ruvain was betrothed to Sarah, and then he went away somewhere. They said that, right, Shimon thought he was dead. Shimon then married Sarah. And we treat Shimon and Sarah as a married couple. How come? Well, because Rav is assuming that there was some kind of a stipulation in that betrothal that was not met, and therefore the betrothal was dissolved, and Shimon then married Sarah. And therefore Shimon and Sarah are considered married, and Reuven cannot go back to her. Ushmuel Amar Eina Keishasis V'Sharyele, where Shmuel says, no, we don't treat Shimon and Sarah as if they're married, i.e., we don't assume that there was some kind of stipulation in the betrothal of Reuven and Sarah, and we don't assume that sort of that stipulation was not met, and therefore Shimon can marry Sarah. We don't say that. And therefore, how could Shmuel say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, that according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Rabbi Yossi assumes that the Yentas are going to say that if Reuven was betrothed to Sarah, and then Reuven gets lost, or Sarah gets lost, so then we'll assume that there was some kind of stipulation in the betrothal. But yet, in the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel, that seems to be the position of Rav, not the position of Shmuel. Shmuel seems to say that we're not concerned about a stipulation in the betrothal. So, Amarle Abai, so Abai says to Rav Yosef, so first, Abai says, look, why are you assuming that when Shmuel says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, that he's assuming like how Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha learned it, right? In which case you have to get into the whole stipulation in the marriage, in the betrothal thing. Maybe it's like Rabbi Ami, who doesn't say anything about stipulations in betrothals, and therefore we don't know what Rabbi Yossi would say about stipulations in betrothals, and therefore Shmuel could still pass like Rabbi Yossi without having to take a position regarding Tanai, a Tanai in the Kiddushin. Okay. Alternatively, even if it is like Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, maybe when Shmuel says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, maybe he's not talking about where it's posel, i.e. by the betrothal. Maybe he's not talking about that. Maybe he's only talking about the Eino posel, which is when they were married, and therefore there's no nafkamina in terms of whether we say that there's a stipulation in the Kiddushin. Alternatively, who says that Rav Huna is right? All we saw is a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel about do we treat a Yevama like an Eish Ish, or do we treat a Yevama not like an Eish Ish. Rav Huna said it's talking about where Reuven was betrothed to Sarah and he went away and then Shimon married her. Who says that that's the case? Maybe Rav Huna is not right. Maybe Rav and Shmuel are arguing about Rav Amnuna. The Amar Rav Amnuna Shemeres Yavam Shezin Sasur the Yevama. That if Reuven's married to Sarah, Reuven dies, Sarah needs to do Yibum with Shimon. If Sarah then has a relationship with somebody else, then she's asura to Shimon, because because she's considered like an Eish, and if she has a relationship with somebody else, she's asura to go back to her husband. In this case, she's asura to go back to her Yavam, Shimon. Umifsla beznus, and she's possible beznus. So Shmuel Amar Eina ke'Eish. Shmuel says that we don't treat her like Eish v'lo mifsla beznus, and she's not possible beznus, and therefore this has nothing to do with having a Tanai Ksuba. It's right. They're arguing about something completely different. V'inami, or else b'kiddushin tovsim b'yavama k'miflagei. Maybe they're arguing simply about if you have Sarah who needs to do Yibum with Shimon, and then somebody else betrothed Sarah, does that count as Kiddushin? Rav says that no, she's an Eishasish, velo tafsiba Kiddushin, and Kiddushin does not work. Shmuel Amar Eina ke'Eishasish, that she's not like an Eishasish, v'tafsiba Kiddushin, and Kiddushin would work. If ligu b'chad azimno, but I thought Rav and Shmuel already argued about that one time. Chadim and chad chaver to itmar. Well, no, one of them was sort of the source case, and the other one was just sort of being implied from the original one. So, but you could argue that that's what they're arguing about. So therefore, Rav Yosef's question about how could Shmuel pass like Rav Yossi, we give 4 alternative answers to why that shouldn't be an issue. So friends, that was Daf Tzadihei of Masechta Yevamos. So Daf started off with a Havmina to say that maybe when Sarah goes on a trip and gets lost, then she should be also to go back to Reuven just like when Reuven gets lost, she's also to go back to Reuven. We say that no, it's different because by Eishes Ish, where if she does it intentionally, she has a relationship intentionally, she'll be also to her husband. So then they make Gzeira even b'shogeg, which is not the case by Achos Isha. That even if Reuven has a relationship intentionally with Rivka, you would still be able to remain with Sarah. We then saw a Gzeras HaKasav, right? We learn out from the pasuk of Osa that it says by Sota. That's how we say that specifically by Ishes Ish, she'd be also to go back to her husband, but by Achos Isha, she's permitted. And then we had this sort of Kal V'chomer that says, I would have thought to say that Baal Isser Kal, on a more lenient Isser, she's not allowed to go back to her husband, and certainly on a more stringent Isser like Achos Isha, she would be also to go back to her husband. I would have thought to say that, and we had a whole bunch of different options for what this Isser Kal could be. We thought maybe it was Machzik Rushaso, thought it could be maybe Yevama, Sota. In the end we said that it's talking about Eishes Ish, and that Eishes Ish is considered a more lenient case since there is a way out of Eishes Ish, i.e. with a get. Okay? And then we saw this machlokas between Rabbi Yossi, well, about how to really understand Rabbi Yossi. The Rabbi Yossi says that when Rivka would be also to Shimon, so then Sarah is also to Reuven. When Rivka would be permitted to Shimon, then Sarah is permitted to Reuven. We saw a machlokas between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha about how to understand that. And then Shmuel paskins like Rabbi Yossi, and we had 4 different kind of ways to understand Shmuel and how he paskins like Rabbi Yossi and how to understand that. Friends, that was Daf Tzadi Hey, Masechta Yevamos. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.